There are two anatomical divisions of the nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the structures within the brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves, the ganglia, and the sensory receptors, which are located beyond the borders of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is contained within and protected by the skull, while the spinal cord is surrounded and protected by the bones of the vertebral column. Anatomically, the brain is divided into four major regions: the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. Generally, these four regions are interconnected and communicate with one another in order to carry out the various functions that the brain performs. In humans, the majority of brain mass, around 80%, constitutes the cerebrum. The outer external surface of the cerebrum is gray in color, referred to as the gray matter, because it contains synapses between neurons and dense capillaries to nourish those neurons. This outer superficial layer is referred to as the cerebral cortex. Deeper within the cerebrum are regions of tissue that are white in color, called the tracts, which are bundles of neuron axons that interconnect the various regions of the cerebrum with other parts of the brain. Usually these neuron axons are densely coated with myelin, which gives them a white color in fresh tissue. Within the cerebrum are functional clusters of neurons called nuclei. The neuron clusters within each of the various nuclei fulfill one or a few specific functions of the cerebrum. The cerebrum as a whole is anatomically divided into two halves called the hemispheres. There's a left cerebral hemisphere and a right cerebral hemisphere. Each hemisphere is further subdivided into regions called the lobes, and generally the name of the lobes mirror the names of the skull bones that are located nearby. The functions of the cerebrum are typically localized to specific lobes. The frontal lobe, located underneath the frontal bone of the skull, houses neurons that control all voluntary skeletal muscle movements. This cluster of neurons is located in a ridge of cerebral tissue called the precentral gyrus, as the term gyrus means a ridge of neurons on the brain. Other nuclei within the frontal lobe are involved in controlling movements of the mouth during speaking, specifically neurons that are found within a region called Broca's area. Other regions within the frontal lobe are involved in planning muscle movements or are involved in regulating mood, creating short-term memories, or are responsible for personality. The parietal lobe, which is located underneath the parietal bone, houses neurons that are responsible for somatosensation, that is, the general senses of touch, temperature, pressure, or pain all over the body surface. Neurons here are also involved in sensing body position, which is called proprioception, and receive sensory information from skeletal muscles, the bones, and the joints that unite the bones. Figure 13.7 highlights the structures of the cerebrum, specifically the frontal lobe located at the anterior aspect of the cerebrum, the precentral gyrus, which is located within the frontal lobe, and the parietal lobe, which is located on the superior and lateral aspect of the cerebrum. The temporal lobe is located underneath the temporal bone and contains nuclei that are responsible for sensing and interpreting auditory information from the ears, in addition to nuclei that sense and interpret olfactory information from the nasal cavity. Olfactory information is interpreted within a structure that's deep in the temporal lobe called the limbic system. The system possesses brain regions that are responsible for creating long-term memory and processing emotions. Long-term memories are processed by a structure of the limbic system called the hippocampus, and emotions are processed in a limbic system region called the amygdala. It is because of this processing of olfactory information within the limbic system that smells and odors can recall memories of a person, a place, or thing in the past, and can also trigger strong emotional feelings. None of the other senses are processed within the limbic system. The occipital lobe, located on the posterior side of the cerebrum and underneath the occipital bone, contain nuclei that are responsible for interpreting visual information from the eyes. These neurons are also found in parts of the temporal lobe and parietal lobe that are in proximity to the occipital lobe. Much of the human cerebrum is devoted to processing visual information from the eyes and is one of our strongest senses. Returning to figure 13.7, we find that the temporal lobe is located on the inferior and lateral side of the cerebrum, while the occipital lobe composes the posterior side of the cerebrum.